Every town has that house, the one people cross the street to avoid, the one that feels wrong even in daylight. On Pine Street, it's the house at number 46. For decades, no one dared step inside, but three boys thought they could prove the legends wrong. What they found under the stairs wasn't just terrifying, it's something that's never stopped watching. Let me tell you why. Number 46, Pine Street had been abandoned for as long as anyone could remember. Its peeling paint, shattered windows, and sagging porch made it an eyesore, but the stories? They made it a nightmare. Parents told their kids to stay away. Teenagers dared each other to go near it. But everyone agreed on one thing, something was wrong with that house. The whispers started on the porch. People swore they heard faint scratching sounds when they got too close. But the real terror was beneath the stairs, where no one dared to look. It was Jason who started it all. He was the kind of kid who thrived on dares, always needing to be the bravest in the room. "It's just a house," he scoffed, standing at the edge of the property with his two best friends, Tommy and Ethan. $5 says I can make it to the stairs." Tommy hesitated, his eyes fixed on the dark windows. What if the stories are true? What if there's something in there? "Don't be a coward," Jason shot back, already marching toward the porch. Ethan reluctantly followed, clutching a flashlight like it was a lifeline. The moment they stepped onto the creaking porch, the air seemed to change. It was colder, heavier, as if the house itself was watching. Jason pushed open the door, and the sound echoed unnaturally in the stillness. Inside, the house was a wreck. Broken furniture, peeling wallpaper, and a smell of damp rot filled the air. Jason's flashlight flickered as he led the way, Tommy and Ethan trailing behind. Then they heard it. A faint scratch sound coming from the stairs. It wasn't random. It wasn't natural. It was deliberate. "Probably a rat," Jason muttered, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. The scratching grew louder, and with it came another sound, a faint, almost human breathing. "Let's go," Ethan whispered, his eyes wide with fear. But Jason wasn't ready to give up. He crouched down, aiming his flashlight at the narrow space beneath the stairs. "What do you see?" Tommy asked, his voice trembling. Jason didn't answer at first. His face went pale as he stared into the darkness. "Something's moving," he finally managed to say. The flashlight flickered again, then went out completely. In the pitch-black silence, the scratching didn't stop. It got faster, more frantic, as if whatever was under the stairs knew it was being watched. Then came the scream. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was a sound that came from the stairs themselves, high-pitched and distorted, like something that hadn't used its voice in years. That was all it took. The boys ran, stumbling over each other in their desperation to escape. Jason dropped the flashlight, Tommy tripped on the porch, and Ethan kept screaming, "Don't look back." When they finally made it to the streetlights, none of them spoke. Jason, usually so cocky, was shaking. "It's waiting," he whispered. "It knows us now." That night, the boys made a pact. They would never go near the house again. But the story doesn't end there. The scratching didn't stop. In fact, it got louder. People on Pine Street started hearing it at night, even in their own homes. Whatever was beneath the stairs wasn't just confined to that house anymore. It had followed them. What would you have done? Stayed to find out what was under the stairs? Or would you have run, just like they did? Think carefully. Because if you've ever heard a sound you couldn't explain in your own home, maybe it's already too late. If you want to know what happened next, how the shadows under the stairs grew stronger and what they truly wanted, stick around. But don't say I didn't warn you. Years after three boys fled the Pine Street house, a renovation crew came to tear it apart. But what they found inside wasn't just strange, it was deadly. A journal hidden in the walls revealed terrifying secrets about what really lived under the stairs. But the worst part, one of them never made it out. The Pine Street house had stood abandoned for years, its sinister reputation keeping buyers away. But when a construction company was hired to renovate it, the whispers in the neighborhood started again. They don't know what they're getting into, an elderly neighbor muttered as she watched the workers unload their tools. The crew, led by a seasoned contractor named Pete, didn't pay attention to the story. To them, it was just another job. By the second day, they'd stripped away most of the old wallpaper and rotten floorboards, revealing the skeleton of the house. That's when one of the workers, Louise, found something unusual in the walls, a small, sealed compartment. "Hey, Pete, you need to see this," Louise called, holding up a dusty leather journal. The edges were cracked with age, and its cover was marked with strange, faint symbols that didn't make sense. Pete, ever the pragmatist, shrugged it off. "Probably just some old junk. Toss it." But Louise couldn't let it go. That night, as the crew packed up, he stayed behind, flipping through the brittle pages under the beam of his flashlight. The writing was erratic, scrawled in different inks and barely legible. The entries described strange events, shadows moving on their own, voices whispering in empty rooms, and always, the scratching beneath the stairs. One line sent chills down his spine: "It watches. It waits. It knows your name." The last few pages were filled with drawings of the stairs from different angles, always with a dark figure crouched beneath them. Luis felt an overwhelming urge to leave, but something held him there, a curiosity he couldn't shake. That night, Pete got a call. It was Luis, his voice shaky. "There's something wrong with this house. I think." The line went dead. Pete rushed to the site, only to find Luis's car in the driveway and the house in total darkness. Inside, the air was suffocating, thick with an unplaceable stench. "Luis?" Pete called out, his voice echoing through the empty rooms. He spotted the flashlight on the floor near the stairs, its beam pointing into the dark crawlspace beneath. Something about the space felt alive, as if it were breathing. Pete crouched down, peering into the void. The silence was deafening, and then, the scratching started. It was faint at first, like nails on wood, but it grew louder, faster, more desperate. Pete backed away, his heart racing. He called for Luis again, but the only response was a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The next morning, the rest of the crew arrived to find Pete outside, pale and shaking. "We're done here," he said, refusing to go back inside. But Luis was gone. They searched the house, but there was no sign of him. Only the journal remained, left on the floor near the stairs. One worker picked it up and opened to the last page. The scrawled words chilled them all: "It knows we're here. We're next." The renovation was abandoned, and the house was boarded up again. But those who worked there never forgot the feeling of being watched, of the house knowing their every move. And as for Luis, his disappearance was never solved. Have you ever felt like something was watching you, even when you were alone? Maybe it's nothing, or maybe it's something waiting beneath the surface. The Pine Street house still stands, its secrets buried for now. But if you dare to dig into the past, be prepared for what might find you first. If you want to know what happens when someone decides to investigate what really lies under those stairs, keep watching. But remember, the shadows always leave their mark. The Pine Street house remained a forbidden landmark, its boarded windows and sagging walls a silent reminder of the horrors within. No one dared enter after the renovation crew abandoned it. But one person couldn't let it go: Rebecca Carter, a local journalist known for chasing stories that no one else would touch. Rebecca had heard the tales for years: the boys who ran out screaming, the worker who disappeared, the journal that no one dared to keep. Unlike others, she didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in evidence, and the Pine Street house had plenty of mysteries waiting to be uncovered. One line sent chills down his spine: "It watches. It waits. It knows your name." The last few pages were filled with drawings of the stairs from different angles, always with a dark figure crouched beneath them. Luis felt an overwhelming urge to leave, but something held him there, a curiosity he couldn't shake. That night, Pete got a call. It was Luis, his voice shaky. "There's something wrong with this house. I think." The line went dead. Pete rushed to the site, only to find Luis's car in the driveway and the house in total darkness. Inside, the air was suffocating, thick with an unplaceable stench. "Luis?" Pete called out, his voice echoing through the empty rooms. He spotted the flashlight on the floor near the stairs, its beam pointing into the dark crawlspace beneath. Something about the space felt alive, as if it were breathing. Pete crouched down, peering into the void. The silence was deafening, and then, the scratching started. It was faint at first, like nails on wood, but it grew louder, faster, more desperate. Pete backed away, his heart racing. He called for Luis again, but the only response was a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The next morning, the rest of the crew arrived to find Pete outside, pale and shaking. "We're done here," he said, refusing to go back inside. But Luis was gone. They searched the house, but there was no sign of him. Only the journal remained, left on the floor near the stairs. One worker picked it up and opened to the last page. The scrawled words chilled them all. "It knows we're here. We're next." The renovation was abandoned, and the house was boarded up again. But those who worked there never forgot the feeling of being watched, of the house knowing their every move. And as for Luis, his disappearance was never solved. Have you ever felt like something was watching you, even when you were alone? Maybe it's nothing, or maybe it's something waiting beneath the surface. The Pine Street house still stands, its secrets buried for now. But if you dare to dig into the past, be prepared for what might find you first. If you want to know what happens when someone decides to investigate what really lies under those stairs, keep watching. But remember, the shadows always leave their mark. The Pine Street house remained a forbidden landmark, its boarded windows and sagging walls a silent reminder of the horrors within. No one dared enter after the renovation crew abandoned it. But one person couldn't let it go, Rebecca Carter, a local journalist known for chasing stories that no one else would touch. Rebecca had heard the tales for years, the boys who ran out screaming, the worker who disappeared, the journal that no one dared to keep. Unlike others, she didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in evidence, and the Pine Street house had plenty of mysteries waiting to be uncovered. On a crisp autumn evening, armed with her camera and a flashlight, Rebecca forced the front door open. The air inside was stale, carrying an unshakable sense of being unwelcome. Dust danced in the narrow beams of light as she stepped inside, her footsteps muffled by decades of grind. Her first stop was the stairs. There, she saw it, the crawlspace. It seemed ordinary enough, just a narrow gap beneath the wooden staircase. But standing near it made her feel wrong. Like someone was behind her, breathing lightly on her neck. She knelt to shine her flashlight into the space. At first, all she saw was debris, wood splinters, scraps of old paper. But then her light caught something strange. A tiny handprint pressed into the dirt, too small to belong to an adult. Rebecca's breath caught. She fumbled for her camera, snapping a picture. But as the flash lit the dark space, she froze. Something had moved. It was subtle, like the shifting of shadows. But shadows didn't have form. They didn't crawl. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady despite her racing heart. There was no reply, only the faint sound of scratching. She backed away, deciding to search the rest of the house. In an upstairs bedroom, she found something even more unsettling, a child's room, untouched by time. A small bed with faded sheets sat against the wall. A wooden rocking horse stood in the corner, its paint chipped and peeling. On the nightstand lay a porcelain doll with one eye missing, its face frozen in a permanent, eerie grin. Rebecca scanned the room, her camera clicking. That's when she noticed a drawing pinned to the wall. It showed a staircase, beneath which crouched a dark, shapeless figure. Written in a child's messy scrawl at the bottom were the words, "He lives under the stairs." Her flashlight flickered. From somewhere below, the scratching grew louder. Rebecca's pulse quickened as she descended the stairs. She crouched again by the crawlspace, determined to see what was there. This time, she reached inside, her hand trembling as it brushed against something soft, fabric. She pulled it out slowly. It was a child's shirt, old and stained with what looked like blood. Then came the voice, soft and childlike, yet hollow. "Why did you take my shirt?" Rebecca screamed, dropping the flashlight. In the sudden darkness, she felt something cold and small wrap around her ankle. She kicked free, scrambling backward, and when she finally found her flashlight and turned it on, the crawlspace was empty. But the air was heavier now, filled with a presence she couldn't explain. The house felt alive, its walls closing in around her. She stumbled out into the night, her heart pounding, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Later, as she reviewed the photos she'd taken, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. In the picture of the handprint, there was a faint outline of a face in the shadows. And in the photo of the drawing on the wall, the dark figure beneath the stairs looked as though it had turned its head, and was staring directly at the camera. Rebecca never went back to the Pine Street house. But the memory of the voice, of the icy grip on her ankle, stayed with her. And sometimes, late at night, she swore she could still hear the scratching. The house, they say, is still there. Waiting. And so is whatever lives beneath the stairs. The Pine Street house had become a legend, a place that no one dared to speak of, yet everyone knew its story. The abandoned house at number 46 still stood in the same state of decay, its eerie presence unchallenged, even after Rebecca's terrifying discovery. For months, it seemed that the house had claimed another soul. But one person was about to return. Ethan was one of the boys who had dared to step foot inside the house years ago. He hadn't been the first to run out that night, the others had beaten him to it. But something had stayed with him, something he couldn't explain. Since that night, he'd never been the same. He couldn't shake the feeling that the house was still watching him, pulling at the edges of his mind. He tried to move on. He went to college, started a family, even managed to forget the scratches under the stairs, the cold breath in the air, the way the house had seemed to call to him. But no matter where he went, the nightmares came. Each one ended the same, standing in the dark, beneath those stairs, hearing that scratching sound. Then, the voice would whisper to him, "You left me." No matter how hard he tried to push it away, he couldn't ignore it any longer. Ethan knew it was time to go back. It was late in the evening when he finally found himself standing in front of the house again. The sight of it brought a rush of memories, the feeling of dread, the whispers of his friends, and the weight of what they had run from. He took a deep breath and stepped up to the front door, which was still cracked open from Rebecca's previous visit. The house had changed little in all these years. The air was thick, as though the very atmosphere around him was holding its breath. He stepped inside, the familiar creaks of the floorboards echoing in the silence. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the house was alive, waiting. The air seemed to thicken with each step he took deeper into the house. The shadows in the corners of the rooms flickered like they were alive, stretching and shrinking with a mind of their own. He made his way toward the stairs, his heart pounding. The scratching sound was there again. But it was different this time. It wasn't just coming from beneath the stairs. It seemed to be coming from all around him, 1,000 tiny claws dragging across wood and stone. He knelt at the foot of the stairs, his hand trembling as he reached toward the crawlspace. The darkness beneath the steps felt like it was pulling him in. He didn't want to look, but something inside him, something deep and primal, demanded he find out what was there. Ethan shined his flashlight into the narrow space, and his blood ran cold. There was something there, something crouched in the dark, watching him. A face. A child's face. The same face he had seen in the drawings all those years ago. Only this time, it wasn't drawn in chalk or ink. It was real, pale, hollow-eyed, with skin stretched tight over bones. Its mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was as though it was trying to speak, but the words were lost in the silence. Ethan couldn't move. The room seemed to close in on him, the shadows growing taller, darker. A sudden gust of cold air hit him, and then came the unmistakable sound of small footsteps. He turned to see the figure, the child, standing behind him. Its head cocked to one side, as if it was studying him. The moment felt frozen in time, as though the house had consumed him, its secrets finally spilling out. The voice came again, but this time, it was clear. You left me. You all left me. Before Ethan could react, the figure lunged at him, but instead of grabbing him, it faded away, like a shadow swallowed by the darkness. Ethan stumbled back, his pulse hammering in his ears. He couldn't breathe, the weight of fear and guilt pressing down on him. Who are you?" he whispered, his voice cracking. The air around him grew even colder. The shadows on the walls twisted and writhed, as though alive with the whispers of the past. He didn't need to be told what had happened. The house had taken something from him, and it wanted it back. Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled. The walls groaned as if the house was coming alive, its timbers shifting, its very bones creaking with ancient anger. A voice, low and rasping, echoed through the room. "It's too late." And then, the house went silent. Ethan turned and ran. His feet barely touched the ground as he fled down the hallway, out the front door, and into the cold night. But as he crossed the yard and looked back at the house, he swore he saw a figure standing in the window. The same child's face, staring down at him from the dark. The Pine Street house remained silent again, its secrets buried under layers of dust and rot. But Ethan knew now, the house hadn't let him go. And it wouldn't let anyone else go either. He'd been marked. Just like the others. And there would be no escaping what had been unleashed beneath the stairs. The chill of the night air seemed to follow Ethan long after he had left the Pine Street house behind. The images of that cold, hollow face haunted him, its eyes, those empty sockets, staring at him like it knew every sin he had ever committed. He tried to push the memory away, but the more he thought about it, the stronger the pull became. The house had always been there, lurking in the background of his life, and no matter how far he ran, he could never fully escape its grasp. Days turned into weeks, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His dreams became fractured, filled with shadows moving at the corners of his vision. At times, he would wake up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, the taste of dust and fear thick in his mouth. He couldn't tell if the house was reaching out to him, or if something inside of him was simply falling apart. One evening, as he sat alone in his apartment, he received a letter. There was no return address, no name, just his own address written in a familiar, jagged script. His heart pounded in his chest as he tore open the envelope, almost afraid of what he would find. Inside was a single page, folded carefully. The handwriting on it was unmistakable. It was from Rebecca. She had been the one to discover the journal, the one who had heard the whispers beneath the stairs, the one who had taken the photographs. The letter was short, but it carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. "Ethan. You need to come back. The house is calling us. We're not the only ones it's after. There's something we missed, something that could explain it all. It's not over. Rebecca." The words sent a shock through him. He didn't know whether to be terrified or relieved. He hadn't heard from Rebecca since she had left the house that night, and now she was asking for his help. The shadows were drawing them back in. With no other choice, Ethan packed his things and drove back to Pine Street, his mind a storm of uncertainty. The road seemed longer this time, as if the distance between him and the house was growing. When he finally arrived, the house stood in front of him, silent and imposing as always. There was a heaviness in the air, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Rebecca's car was parked outside. She wasn't far. He pushed the door open with a creak and stepped inside. The house felt colder than before, the air thick with something dark. Rebecca was waiting for him in the living room, sitting on the floor with the journal spread out in front of her. She looked up when he entered, her eyes hollow, like she hadn't slept in days. There was something different about her now, a strange, distant look in her eyes, like she had crossed over into something that couldn't be undone. "You came," she said, her voice quiet but urgent. "I'm glad you're here. I wasn't sure how much longer I could last in this place." Ethan nodded, his heart heavy. "What did you find?" Rebecca pointed to the journal. "It's all here. The house, the child, it was never just a story. I think I know what happened, Ethan." Her hand trembled as she turned the pages. "The house was built on an old burial ground," she began, her voice steady but strained. "But not just any burial ground, this was where a family was once cursed. They lived in a house, and the child, his name was Samuel, was the last to die." Ethan felt a coldness sweep over him as Rebecca spoke. He remembered the child's face, the way it had watched him. But the name Samuel, why did it sound so familiar? Rebecca continued. "The family was involved in something dark. They made a deal with an entity beneath the house. A spirit, or something worse, that feeds on the souls of those who disturb its peace. Samuel wasn't just a victim, he was the key." The pieces were starting to fit together, but Ethan still didn't understand. "What do you mean the key?" Rebecca swallowed hard. "The house, the shadows beneath the stairs, they're all tied to Samuel. He wasn't dead when they thought he was. He was hidden away in the walls, waiting. And now, he's awake." Ethan's heart raced. What does he want? Why didn't we see it before? Rebecca's eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw true fear in her gaze. "He wants the rest of us. He's waiting for the moment when we are closest, when we think we're safe. He's been reaching out to us. Every night since we left, every shadow, every creak of the floor, it's him, trying to bring us back." Suddenly, the house groaned. The floorboards shifted beneath them, as if the house was waking up, ready to consume them both. They looked at each other in panic. "We need to go," Ethan said, but Rebecca was already shaking her head. "No, we can't leave. We need to end this, once and for all. We have to face him." Ethan didn't want to go back to the crawlspace beneath the stairs, but deep down, he knew it was the only way. They had to confront the darkness that had been feeding on their fear for so long. Together, they made their way to the stairs. The shadows beneath them seemed to stretch farther than ever before, pulling at their heels, beckoning them forward. As they crouched near the opening, the scratching began again, louder this time, as if something was waiting to be freed. Ethan reached for the flashlight, shining it into the dark space below, but there was nothing there. Only the silence. The oppressive, suffocating silence. Then, they heard it. A soft whisper, like the sound of fabric rustling. "You came, for me." The shadows beneath the stairs were no longer just shadows. They were a presence, an entity with a name. And it was hungry.